All right, everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Paul Weston Jr., aka Boy Green. If you're welcome back, that's of course because you're already a subscriber. If you're not, what are you doing? Click subscribe, join the channel. It's the off season. It's the first episode officially of the off season. And who else could I have had other than Connor Rogers of Bleacher Report, and of course of the Badlands feed, not just Badlands podcast, Badlands feed, folks. Articles, Q&A. I mean, the podcasts are fantastic. So let's bring them on. None other than the man, the myth, the legend, Connor Rogers. Welcome, Connor, man.
Paul, what's going on, man? Always good to catch up with you, especially during this crazy time of year.
That's right. So I'm glad that this can be interview 450 of whatever you've got going on, man. Nonetheless, I appreciate it, man, because you're a wild man during this week, and we were kind of talking about it off air. We don't realize how crazy this is until it hits us, and then it's wild. So let's jump right into this. Adam Gase is fired. Now, that's not surprising. We all knew that was going to happen. But the fact of the matter is, Adam Gase is finally gone. But I think a lot of Jet fans are confused, Connor. I've seen your notifications lighting up. They're like, oh, man, Christopher Johnson's going to be making the final decision? Oh, geez, this doesn't make any sense. It's the same old Jets. Folks, he's the acting billion-dollar owner. What did you think? Of course he's making the final decision. But I think it helps some Jet fans out here give some clarity. Joe Douglas is the one who's doing all the legwork, and he's the one who's giving the suggestion that, of course, Christopher Johnson is likely going to just approve.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think when you look at it, Paul, people are obviously rightfully so a little afraid and it was a little weird the way the Jets announced it. The Jets announced it as his trio, right? You have Jaime Elhai, the president, which is really the business side. You have Christopher, who is the owner in Woody's absence. And of course, Joe Douglas, who's the general manager of the team. And I think when people see that, they think it's, a pie of 33% across the board. And I think when you look at that, it becomes a little alarming. But from my understanding, to kind of settle down here and everybody relax, is that you nailed it. It's going to be Joe Douglas bringing these candidates to the table. He's the guy that's going to be getting them on the Zoom interview or ultimately in the building to sit down. Now, I think what this means is, a guy like Jaime Elhai, somebody like Christopher, they might be in the room and they might have questions that they want to ask, and they might give their opinion and their input of how they thought things went. But when all is said and done, this should be up to Joe Douglas. Now, the reason, of course, Christopher has to be involved, like you said, he's going to be signing the checks. And if we've kept up with coaching searches in recent years, those checks become bigger and bigger when you want a big fish. Let's not forget, I think it was just last year, Matt Rule fetched like a 6-year, $70 million deal. John Gruden's gotten a $100 million deal. I'm not saying the Jets are going to go get a $100 million guy that they are so confident about he gets a 10-year deal. But if you get into the range where you have to do some convincing, like a Matt Campbell from Iowa State or a big name where you're not at the top of a guy's list, and the Jets won't be that. That's what's unfortunate here. They're not going to be the top job. You got to, try to influence them in some other way. A lot of that in life is cold, hard dollars. So that's where the business side comes in. That's where Christopher Johnson comes in. I think what people should feel good about is, and it has not been this way in the past, so this would be different if it goes down how I think, is that Joe Douglas should ultimately be sticking his foot in the ground and saying, this is the guy I want. This is the guy that we have to get. This is the person that can lead this organization the right way for these reasons. And quite frankly, I think with the Adam Gase head coaching search, they just didn't have someone like that. Mike Maccagnan was a bit of a pushover. He was a bit of a guy of if you want this, then I'm okay with it. And I think that's how you get into the world of Adam Gase ending up the head coach, because somebody like Christopher Johnson, because somebody like Jaime Elhai maybe liked the conversation they had with him, didn't have the same wealth of knowledge about what he had done on the field in Miami and where things had gone wrong, where Joe Douglas is going to understand, hey, what are the weak parts of this guy, and be able to break it down in a sense to the other two guys in the room after the interview was done. So yes, with the Jets, it's always a little scary because it is a little unconventional to announce that you have the business operations involved, the owner so directly involved. People know that stuff might happen, but it's weird to announce it. But when all is said and done, Christopher Johnson hinted at this in his press conference, this is going to be a Joe Douglas-led operation.
Connor, in the last cycle, it became immediately clear the number one guy I did not want was Adam Gase. So, of course, the Jets hired that guy. This time around, I'm like, you know what? I don't see any clearly terrible candidate that I wouldn't want. Of course, until Sunday, when Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network said, oh, Brian Schottenheimer's going to be in the mix. I went, what the hell? Brian Schottenheimer? Is this a joke? Is this a cruel joke? And I was trying to make sure, okay, yep, Tom Pelissero verified. Yep, still NFL Network guy. This is a joke, right? There's nothing really to that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a joke, but the problem with this time of year, and as Jets fans, we might take it as one. The problem with this time of year, especially with jobs that might not be high destination, high profile jobs, is a lot of people start getting attached to it because their agents want them attached to it because they want leverage in house. That could be on TV. That could, like Urban Meyer, for instance, that could be at their current job. I think, we saw that with Dan Mullen at Florida. That one opened up a lot of eyes. And I think with Schottenheimer, it's him, really not him, probably his agent, trying to raise his value internally to Seattle and maybe start to get his name in the news cycle. So if Seattle does have a good next year or two on offense, maybe it feels a little bit more realistic next year. We've seen this in the past, right? You've seen a lot of names get thrown to the cycle that quite frankly aren't ready, quite frankly haven't had the resume. And I think it's easy when you could sell it as, hey, he worked there for a while. They did go to AFC championship games. And I'm not a shoddy guy like you, Paul. And I don't know if shoddy's head coach level material, but I think it's easier for an agent and media and a lot of people to sell those kinds of things. So you're hearing all kinds of wacky names. I mean, I laughed out loud when I saw Ryan Day as the backup option in Jacksonville if they don't get Urban Meyer. I've been to Ohio State. I've talked to people around the program. That is Ryan Day's dream job. And even if things do end up in a world 5-10 years from now where he wants to go try out the NFL, he just got his feet wet in that job and is having a lot of success. He's not leaving. So it's crazy season, right? You can see names across the board that you don't expect. And I think you could be surprised at times, but you should always kind of, have those reservations when you see a name to keep an eye on or a name attached. What you should really keep an eye on is an interview list and then work from there.
Let's go to this, and it's a very blunt question. Are there any prerequisites for this Jets head coaching job?
That's a great question, and it's one that I think a lot of people would love to know. Now, what I'll say is I don't think there's a prerequisite in terms of a filter, right? Sometimes, for example, teams might go into a scouting room and the philosophy might be, hey, we don't draft corners that are under 6 feet tall for the outside, not for the slot. And that could literally take out every corner under 6 feet tall on their board. People think that's crazy. That's a real life filter for some teams, or could be. They're not doing this with the coaching search where you sit there and you go, oh, well, this guy didn't do this. We don't want to talk to him. I think what you look at is you would definitely like to do a background search where you wonder, how is he with developing young talent? How is he with handling the room? Because of how poorly those two aspects of the Gase era were failures, right? They didn't do a good job developing young talent. There was a lot of commotion in the locker room and around the team. Sure, there's guys that'll go to bat for Adam Gase, but the guys that don't go to bat for Adam Gase aren't coming out and saying that. It's just known off the record. So I think, and he was really described more aloof than as, toxic in a sense, which is a huge problem in an NFL locker room. So I think when you look at that, those are things that are probably going to be a prerequisite, but we don't know those things when we see a guy's name on paper. You have to be around that guy for a long time. Good thing about Joe Douglas, when you look at him, he's been in the NFL for a long time. He has a lot of connections where he'll be able to answer those questions. Maybe he leans on an assistant GM like Rex Hogan, or maybe a guy like Phil Savage for the areas that he needs help in and areas that he doesn't have familiarity with. And that's why it's cliche to this point, but you're hearing all these things like CEO and casting a wide net. They really do want to sit down and get in the room and get to know some of these guys that they don't know. And I think that's a good sign from Joe Douglas. If this was a situation where they came out and said, hey, we're hiring Don Martindale from Baltimore and it's done, I like Don Martindale, but I wouldn't want such a process like that where it's clear that Joe Douglas hired a guy he knows without doing the extra legwork and going outside the box. I would like to take a swing for the fences out of Matt Campbell. I'd like to bring in a Joe Brady and see what his plans are and along the lines like that. And to be fair, they did a good job with that on the last coaching search. They just picked the wrong guy. They had good guys in the building. Matt Rule wanted that job and they blew it. Todd Monken wanted that job and they blew it. So the Jets' problem typically isn't getting a good candidate or two in the building. it's getting them over the finish line by making the right choice, and they can't screw that part up. And I think that's why you're hearing so much of, hey, it's going to be slow, or you might not have that luxury in the NFL because of how fast things move. But they don't have people ask me this all the time. They go, who are the Jets going to hire? Because they think I have this, magic wand or might know. And quite frankly, there are a lot of things that I know about the Jets organization. There's nobody on the planet that knows right now who they're going to hire, because in that building, they haven't made their mind up yet.
And that's a great segue to my next point here. And it's kind of almost a follow up on the prerequisite question, because a lot of people are saying, okay, look at Joe Douglas here. And you've said this a lot. And I want to give you all the credit in the world, because, normally when a guy gets a crack at the GM chair, you only get that crack once. Maybe if you're lucky, you get it twice. But normally it's only one time, which means Joe Douglas has never hired a head coach before. So when people were thinking of prerequisites, one that seems to jump out is some sort of familiarity, some sort of connective tissue. You mentioned Wink Martindale made a lot of sense. People feared the Doug Peterson bullet, potentially with that prior relationship. So again, do you have any sense, again, only Joe Douglas knows, I guess, that is a factor, that somehow is a tiebreaker based on a prior relationship? Or is Joe Douglas really entering this thing with a complete blank slate, knowing somebody previously or working with someone previously really doesn't matter? He could just hire a guy he's never worked with before.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here, right? Number one, I do think he's going in open-minded. Now, the good thing is, because the problem is, you're looking at it, we're sitting here, it's the first week of January, and a lot of people would sit here, wow, that it's tough to get to know 8 different guys you've never worked with in realistically maybe 10 days if you're lucky. I mean, these things happen fast, Paul. You've been covering the NFL long enough, and you've covered Jets head coaching searches long enough. You know how quickly they move. It's not really possible to get to know 8 different guys on the level that you want to under that 2-week window. And this is the dirty side of the NFL. A lot of these things started a long time ago. The Jets didn't have a win till week 15. The Jets knew they were moving on from Adam Gase for a long time. I'm not saying they were doing things behind his back, but there's feelers that go out there to agents that represent coaches or certain programs or teams. And you start to get a feel, right? You get a feel of, will this guy come here? Will this guy talk with us? Who is this guy's staff? Who is this guy's connections? Those things really, really matter, where you probably have a head start on a lot of those things right now. Now you want to sit down and make it a little more official face to face. So yes, he's going in with an open mind. To say that he doesn't have his full binder on all these guys, that's not true. I think he knows what to expect from a lot of them. Now, I will say, surprises happen. Adam Gase really blew away the room 2 years ago, and we all were afraid of it, but the people in that room were very impressed. Maybe somebody, and I'm not trying to spike up fear by saying an Adam Gase can happen again, but I'm saying Joe Brady's like 30 years old. Just not a lot of people have a work experience with that guy. He was in college last year coaching an LSU championship team. So when you look at it, that's a guy that maybe he comes in the room and go, wow, he's as bright as everyone says he is. And I didn't know he wants to work with this potential defensive coordinator. That's something that excites us. So those are the things that you're looking at here. Now, it's almost like so many people have drawn conclusions to Don Martindale, and I've done this before too. You've known that. I said it, I think, back in September on Badlands, or one of the shows, where I said, hey, it makes a lot of sense for the team. That might be one where, quite frankly, you're looking at not a fallback option to a sense, but maybe an option that you feel good about, you don't feel bad about, but in a sense, it's not your swing for the fences kind of option, right? Nobody knows if Matt Campbell will take interviews from Iowa State. Is he a guy that feels like he's topped out? We've heard Pat Fitzgerald is finally a guy that wants to take interviews. Maybe he feels like he maxed out at Northwestern. Matt Campbell has been kind of described as this guy that's not striving to coach at the top and make $10 million a year. So maybe it doesn't matter to him. And 2 years ago, it didn't. But once again, does he feel like he maxed out at Iowa State at this point? Or maybe he just likes Joe Douglas better, where he's willing to have that conversation. Those are the things people are all sitting here and wondering. It's almost like a draft where you go in with your big board, you look at all your candidates, you stack them up, and then you start to wonder, hey, who's left on the board after we send in these interview requests? Because you're going to get denied quite a bit. That just happens in the NFL. It's just the way things go. A guy might clearly not be ready to build a staff, and that's not a risk you want to take on. So there's a lot of factors that affect your board, and it's crunch time for them to really start stacking the deck on that.
All right, let's go to the owner, Christopher Johnson, this week. Gave his press conference with the media after the fact, after the news of Adam Gase being let go came last night. He was, of course, asked about a question, Connor, you've been asked probably 4 billion times: organizational structure. Is it encouraging that he said, quote, under consideration? It's up in the air whether or not they will change that. Quite frankly, that's a better answer than we've gotten over the last bunch of years. So is that encouraging? Is that just table talk to just say, maybe?
I think it is encouraging. I think, quite frankly, that we didn't get a no, that's not something we're interested in, is a really good sign. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to do it. I'm not saying that he didn't just say that to hold off the pack of wolves that attack them for it, like me, every single time, because I think it's a flawed structure. If Joe Douglas is making the hire, Paul, of the head coach, should he not manage the said head coach? That's the issue here. So I understand why, and I understand why the GM and the head coach report to the owner in the Jets organization, because the Jets never align those two. But that's the root of the issue right there. So I think when you look at it, it they must really like Joe Douglas. And if you're paying him that much over a 6-year deal, you obviously do, that you're considering that option. And I think that's great. I think it's one of those things where it's a sign of they think they found stability in the front office for the first time in a long time. I think they probably liked the early returns on his draft. I think that, they feel that his connections in the league will pay dividends long term. So it's probably something, Paul, where, let's be real, we've followed the Jets all our lives. If Joe Douglas makes the head coaching hire and this team goes 4-12 next year, and then everybody's on the hot seat going into the following year, which is the last thing Jets fans want to hear, you might walk that back, that structure that you just announced. So it's probably a wait and see. Now, if you're looking at a situation where Joe Douglas hires the coach he wants, you're seeing early returns, then you might sit there and go, you know what? We feel so good about what Joe has set up here. I'm going to step back. The coach is going to report to you. You keep me in the loop on everything, but that is your world. You run the football operations to a full extent now. So I think just looking at it from a very common sense perspective, it makes sense for them to start considering this. But we have to kind of keep things in perspective and know that, might not ever be the case with the Johnsons.
When I was looking ahead at this for the Jets, how I asked myself, how attractive is this Jets job? And as a Jets fan, sometimes we could be biased. I'm like, look at all this cap space, 18 draft picks over the next 2 years. Who would I take? And I'm like, before I just announce that to the world, let me just take a gander here. Now, the Chargers, Herbert, Bosa, Derwin James, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. Whoa. Wait a second here. That looks pretty good. And let's look at Houston. Okay, no picks, but maybe that'll be a wash with eventually them getting it back. Oh, Deshaun Watson led the league in passing. And that guy's pretty good. And then Jacksonville, number 1 picks, this, that. I'm like, whoa, wait a second. For a second, I thought it was a shoe-in that the Jets had one of the best ones out there. It seems like for an unlucky, snake-bitten franchise in a year that they just happen to have a head coaching opening, there seems to be a lot of competition this year, and it's just unlucky and it sucks.
Yeah, there is. It's a good point, and I think it's a fair point. Now, I don't think the Jets' job is as toxic as everyone is claiming it out to be. I think it's just a pretty even playing field. I think everyone has their pros and cons. When you look at the Chargers, they're notoriously a cheap franchise, and that rubs people the wrong way. On the flip side, they have a superstar quarterback that is very young, and some people want to be in LA, and they have talent on the roster. And Tom Telesco has done a pretty good job over there, where you feel like that working relationship can go in the right direction. I think they're going to have a lot of hiring power, and I think it's going to lean towards Brian Dable, but we'll see how open-minded they are in the process. Jacksonville's obvious. They have a boatload of picks. One of them happens to be the number 1 overall pick. The owners are taking, I would think the ownership wants to push to take Trevor Lawrence, and I think coaches won't be fighting for that, right? When you look at it. So that one is, you don't like the comments by the owner that he has roster control. That will rub some people the wrong way. But overall, that's a job where there's not a lot of pressure to win. There really never is, quite frankly. And you feel like you could build the roster the way you want it starting at quarterback. So that's a pretty good job, all in all, when you look at things. Detroit is one that is a little bit up and down. The roster is really bad. It's left in a really bad way from Matt Patricia. But Robert Saleh, one of the better candidates on this job market, is a Michigan guy. And everything I've heard is that he would like to get that job, go back to Michigan, coach the Lions, have that 4 to 5 year window to get things right. So it's to each their own, right? And then here's the other thing, Paul. The Jets have a GM. Some people would jump at the chance to work with Joe Douglas. Other people that are head coach candidates have made plans behind the scenes with a GM candidate that they travel with as a duo. So that job's closed off to them. They sit there and go, I don't know, Joe Douglas, it's nothing personal, but I got my guy that I want to go with. We're a package deal. So everything's different, right? And everybody gets in these articles of ranking jobs, or here's why this, here's why that. There's a million pros, a million cons, and quite frankly, these are human beings you're dealing with that all have preferences, right? It's when it comes down to it, some people want to go home. Some people want to go to the sunny beach in LA. Some people want to go to a media market where they're not going to be bothered like they constantly are in high pressure areas. Some people want to go into a situation where the roster isn't terrible and they could add some pieces with the cap space and draft picks they already have, build it their way, and feel like they can get to a postseason in a year. So everybody is built different. Everyone has different aspirations. And that's why it's very hard to sit here and rank the jobs. And like you said with Houston, I love Deshaun Watson. I think he's a top 5, maybe top 3 quarterback in the NFL. Roster's bad. Roster's aging. They have no draft picks. They have somebody there in Jack Easterby that's been labeled as a serious issue in terms of the culture issues that go on there, even though he's like a culture coach. He's run some people out of the building, and that's rubbed people the wrong way. So there's pros and cons to every single job.
No question about it. Again, speaker Connor Rogers of the Badlands feed. Again, subscribe today. Just look him up for some more great stuff on podcast articles and the like. Let's go back to Christopher Johnson for a second. Of course, Sam Darnold. It seems to be the great debate, because if the Jets are at number 1, there'd be no debate among any of the Jets fan base. They're at number 2, so of course it has to be an interesting offseason from that perspective. Christopher Johnson speaking at this initial presser ahead of finding out who that head coach is going to be says, hey, that decision will be up to the new head coach and in tandem with Joe Douglas. Connor, for anyone who listens to the Badlands feed, already knows how you feel on the subject. But I got to tell you, I want to know what the moment was. I don't know if you've addressed this on Badlands yet, but for me, that was the hill I was going to die on. A couple of weeks ago, when as soon as the Jets beat the Rams and it looked like the Trevor Lawrence thing wasn't going to happen, I'm like, guys, what are you talking about here? It's Sam Darnold. Screw the other quarterback. It was Trevor Lawrence or bust. That's it. It's Sam Darnold. But over the coming weeks, after basically Badlands has been brainwashing me every week. It's like, come on, man. Justin Fields, Zach Wilson. There's been whispers in my ear. I'm like, no, guys, it's Sam Darnold. Okay, maybe it wouldn't be that bad. And then this week, it just hit. It like a ton of bricks, and it shouldn't just be any one game, but I think it's been building for me. Now I've just come to the realization that it just seems to make the most sense to flip Darnold off to the next team. I think that'll probably be San Francisco. We can talk about that in a second, but drafting whoever quarterback you want at number 2. I want to ask you, Connor, because I don't know if you've ever said this before. What is the moment? Because you were really high on Sam Darnold and the potential. You also addressed the flaws and the turnovers at USC, but you, along with others, Dan Orlovsky, you may be the biggest Sam Darnold guy that's still out there alive. I knew there's somebody, but that, man, Sam Darnold could be a top quarterback. What moment hit you? I assume it has to have been this year where you're like, okay, guys, I don't think Sam Darnold's a guy anymore.
I think, quite frankly, Paul, the pass protection and the offensive line did get a lot better this year. I think that they had enough on the field, not in the beginning of the season, but down the stretch, where you have Denzel Mims getting open and not getting the ball. You have, Perriman getting open, obviously not a great player, but one that's still getting open, Crowder. I think Sam has just become a broken quarterback, and I think a lot of the things I feared coming out of that draft have really illuminated this year. And, when I look at Darnold, did I think he was a first-round player? Absolutely. But did I think, I didn't have him in my top 3 quarterbacks in that class. He was quarterback 4. So that's not me gloating, saying I'm right. It's me saying that there were flaws that a lot of people failed to address. And a lot of that was timing, decision-making, seeing the field. And those things have not gotten better. Your internal clock, your play speed, those things haven't gotten better in year 3, to the point where if he turned into a top 12 quarterback at any point in his career going forward, he would be one of the biggest statistical outliers we have ever seen at the position. And that's how bad the numbers have been so far, where in his best games, he's a check down game manager quarterback. In his worst games, he takes you out before halftime almost with the turnover issues or the lack of big plays. And you can't survive like that in today's NFL. I've said it with this draft class here, and this is another reason why I want them to move on, is that you need to be, typically you'd like to have mobility out of your passer, and you need to be a vertical thrower. And the guys in this class are very special at that. Trevor Lawrence, no duh. But Zach Wilson and Justin Fields check those boxes. And I think even to an extent, Trey Lance does as well, where I will have higher grades on all four of those guys than I had on Sam Darnold coming out. Now, I thought there was a chance Sam Darnold could find success in New York with the right staff and the right talent. The Jets failed in both of those areas. But at the same time, Sam Darnold did not get better. He got worse. And if we had time to sit here and give him a fourth year, then you sit there and go, okay, I totally understand that. But quite frankly, in today's NFL, you don't. You're picking number 2 overall in a great quarterback class. That's your prime opportunity to escape the problems you're having at quarterback and maybe find the answer of the future. The other thing is, in May, you need to make a decision on his 5th-year option. That'll be over $25 million guaranteed. So you can roll the dice this year on Sam Darnold. And so you do pick up the option. And if he's terrible again for the 4th year, you feel like you really know what he is, or although I feel like I already do. And then you're stuck with him on the books for almost $30 million a year. Now, if you don't pick up the option and give him the chance this year, if he's really bad, well, your ROI, your return on your investment is shot. You're not getting that 2nd-round pick back. You're probably not getting anything. You're just letting him walk in free agency. Terrible, number one. That's not how you get draft capital back. Number 2, you're probably not picking number 2 again, because if your new coach is picking number 2 again, you probably didn't hire the right guy. So that's a serious issue. Number 3, there's no guarantee the 2022 quarterback class is as good as 2021. And as somebody that does early work on this, right now, I don't think it will be. Things change. It's one of the best quarterback classes I've evaluated in the last 10 years in terms of how deep it is and how talented it is at the top. So all the factors are going against Sam Darnold, right? And if you want to be one of those people, and I get this, that blames the play and the lack of big plays and the turnovers and the mechanics on the coaching staff and the roster, that's fine. But there's enough film out there where you could find where things have gone right, where the pass protection's good, where guys are open, where he doesn't want to throw the ball down the field. And that's a bit of an issue. So, and even if you still don't trust me after all of that, there's all the factors of how things work in a front office right now. Rookie quarterback contract, guys that, once again, I can only speak for myself, but these guys that they have the opportunity to pick at number 2 have better grades and are more talented than Sam Darnold was coming out. And a lot of people got fed this narrative because mainstream media kept feeding them as Sam Darnold the lock to be the number 1 overall pick for that entire draft cycle. And that's, if they felt that way, that's fine. And I'm right and wrong about things like everyone else, right? I thought Deshaun Watson was the best quarterback in his class, not Mitch Trubisky, but I didn't think Pat Mahomes would be Pat Mahomes. So there's a hit and a miss. This is what happens in the NFL. I think Jets fans just kind of have to accept the fact that maybe Sam Darnold was a bust. It happens in the NFL. Or maybe, quite frankly, his next stop, if it's San Francisco, he finds his way to be a middle-of-the-pack quarterback. That's still not impressive from where he was drafted. And that's not good enough for the Jets, because are you going to pay your, at best, middle-of-the-pack quarterback $30 million? Like, it's best for both sides to move on. If Sam Darnold can resurrect his career elsewhere, great for him. But it doesn't mean that the Jets were wrong to do it. That's what people need to understand. It doesn't make them wrong if they move on and take a swing for the fences at this very talented quarterback class.
All right, Connor, only a few more before we get you out of here, before you move on to the next interview that I'm sure you got to do. You brought up ROI. Let's talk about it for Sam Darnold, because, again, I'm on the train. Let's go. You're the conductor. Where are we going? Sam Darnold is going to get traded. What's the package? Because despite the fact, so he had a couple of games where he was a more athletic Alex Smith, right? I think that was what Drew from Jersey said, right? So for a couple of games, okay, he didn't have any turnovers. He blew up in the New England game, Week 17. Despite that, all these respected NFL people seem to say that the package for the Jets is a second and change, despite even everything that we've seen so far. Do you buy that is still the package? And also, there was another report, I wish I could remember who said it, but they said that basically up to 10 teams could be interested in Sam Darnold, and thus what I thought would happen if he was going to be traded a while back when they were going to get the number 1 pick, that it could create some sort of mini bidding war. Maybe they could get the best, even a better package potentially than that. Is that all still on the table? Is that hogwash? Give it to me straight, Connor.
I think it'll be a 2nd-round pick. And when you look at that, I don't think it'll be more. Now we'll see. I was wrong about the Jamal Adams return. I was saying for the longest time, everywhere anyone would listen to me, that Jamal Adams probably brings you back a mid-round pick and a player. And they got all 3 of those things, and they got an extra one. So that's a big difference. Now, I know this, Paul. People in the NFL really like Sam Darnold, big time evaluators. But at the same time, that report of 10 teams, that list is going to dwindle. Guys are going to go into the draft and know who they want to get. Guys are going to go into free agency and sign starters. That happens every year. Trades, all these different things. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's not going to be 10 teams. But can you get 4 in a bidding for him? And they offer you a 3 and a 5, and you go, hey, give us a 2 and it's done. That's kind of where I look at things with this. So the return's not going to be very big, but a 2 is good for Sam Darnold. I want to make that very clear. An extra 2 in this draft would give the Jets 2 1s, 2 2s, 2 3s, 1 4, 2 5s, and a 6. It's a lot of picks, and it's a lot of good draft picks. So when you look at it from that perspective, I think that you'll have enough teams in it where you'll get the return you want. I don't expect a first. I don't expect a 2 and a 4. I think we're looking in that 3 and a 4 or second round pick kind of return.
Okay, I'll just say this just so it's on record and we have this recorded on this footage. I said way back when, and I'm just going to die on that hill. I think somehow, some way, the Jets get a first. Of course, I'm sure you would love that too. I think they get a late first. I think somehow there's some sort of.
If it happens, repost this. I want to see it again. Okay, I will give you all the credit in the world for that one.
Okay, pat myself on the back. I'm hoping that happens. I think a late for somehow, some way. Joe Douglas does his Joe Douglas, Jamal Adams magic, and he convinces somebody to give up a late one, whether that's New Orleans, Pittsburgh, whoever that is. So let's just remember this. Out of all the interviews you do, there you go. There's something to remember this one at, that happening. Let's go back into the coaching world for a second before we get you out of here. First off, is there a candidate? So I mentioned Brian Schottenheimer. You can take that one if you want. Is there a coach that is the Adam Gase? Is the guy that, oh my God, please, for the love of everything that's holy, don't be this guy, so I can bring this back up when the Jets hire him?
Quite frankly, I don't. I really don't. I remember there's still the tweet out there somewhere. I called Adam Gase a very hard sell at the time when they interviewed him, and that was like me being polite. It's crazy. So I don't see a guy like that. I see underwhelming candidates, right? Like, would we be really, really excited about, Arthur Smith or Marvin Lewis? Or we could find reasons to be, but we're not going to see the hire come in and go like, oh my God, like they nailed it. Like, we're going to sit back and be like, okay, let's see how this goes. Like, there's some good things we've seen. There's some bad things we've seen. You're just kind of like, meh, whatever. Hopefully they make the right picks in the draft and get a good roster. The only guy I've said for a long time that particularly excites me is Matt Campbell. And I don't know if he'll even interview with the team, but that's the one where I'd sit there and go, I'll die on this hill. I think he's going to be great wherever he goes. And you know what I mean? It's that kind of class where, and I kind of feel close. I'm excited about Joe Brady. There's so much unknown there, but I think he is such a good offensive coach that with the right staff, the rest just falls into place. Like, it was a misconstrued. Adam Gase was never a great offensive coach. He was billed as that, but you can look into the data and the film and the examples, and he never was that. Joe Brady is. So, it's interesting. I think that I don't really see this like floor candidate that I go, wow, that's a terrible idea. You know what I mean? Like, and I've said that about coaches before where, like, I didn't like Matt LaFleur as a coach because he wasn't great in Tennessee, but he's done a great job in Green Bay. And I was wrong about that. I did not like Adam Gase, and I was right about that. So, like, coaching, and maybe this is just me learning over the years that you just don't know everything about these guys. And quite frankly, NFL teams don't know everything about these guys. I've had people in the NFL tell me Stefanski was going to be a nightmare, LaFleur was going to be a nightmare, or on the flip side, some other guys are going to be great that do nothing. So people, you just never know until they're in, because these are, let's be real, a lot of these guys are first-time head coaches. So it's all a little bit of a roll of the dice because you don't know how people are going to really sink or swim in that role that's totally different from an assistant role.
Okay, a follow up on that. Two more before we get you out of here. So that a thing? Because if you look at, so it's trying to make sure history doesn't repeat itself. A lot of the Jets head coaches outside of Adam Gase, we already knew that one was going to be bad. Was guys getting their first whack. Rex Ryan got his first whack. Mangini, all the guys over the last Todd Bowles, yeah, is another one where they got their first whack and then it was an utter failure. So there's the retread, which you just announced a bunch from, and they don't sound great. They don't sound sexy. But on the other side, then you got these first year guys you just kind of roll the dice on. Is there anything, too, that they've never done it before and there should be any hesitation from Joe Douglas when that's named?
Yes. Well, there's the side of it that game management has become so much in the NFL where Bowles was very bad at game management. Gase was worse. And quite frankly, it feels like the Jets never have a good game manager. I would have to really go back and wonder how Mangini was, because I know he was so, Damian Woody said this, it's the most prepared you will ever be going into a game. So I could see, I'd have to really go back and think about those years. And even Rex made bad decisions, but Rex had an energy that it was a good roster, maybe great, honestly, probably a great roster. And Rex just had an energy. Rex was a bit of a stick of dynamite, right? Where it was like, you knew who's going to burn out and blow up. But when things are riding high, that team believed in themselves. And I think the Jets want somebody that gets the team believing in themselves again and has the organization. And you can look for those qualities, but you just never know how they're going to hit. And you can only look at what they've been given so far, right? Like Marvin Lewis, is a guy that has had success in a lot of different areas as a head coach, but couldn't win a playoff game. And like you said, at this point of his career, is he inspiring enough? Look at Mike McCarthy. It could scare you a little bit. It really can. So, and I like Marvin Lewis, but that wouldn't be the route I would personally go. There's something, what they don't tell you about the guys that have never done it before is that they might have an extra spark to them when they get that chance, because it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And there might be guys burn out in the NFL. They really, really do. But when guys come in on fire and everything's going great, it's an energy that is hard to recapture, later on in your career. So like I said earlier in the show, there's just pros and cons to all of these things that have to be weighed. And even us that cover this 24 hours a day, there's only so much we could dissect from it.
All right, last one, Connor, before we get you out of here. I saw your tweet, Jets head coach searching bingo, which is fantastic. And one of the things is everyone's talking about the traits. So CEO, we're going to cast a wide net. We're going to do all this and that. So I want to ask you, what are the most important traits for the next head coach of the New York Jets?
I think here's another one for the bingo board, a leader of men. And I really do. I think this coach needs to walk in and be respected. And I think the players on the other side of it need to have faith in this coach that they're going to win every week. And they didn't have that with Adam Gase. They started to lose that with Todd Bowles, quite frankly, where you go in and there's just no fire. There's no adjustments. There's no, faith, quite frankly. So I think that's number one for me. I think number two, the ability to develop talent. It's been an issue with the Jets. Everybody sits and goes, well, the Jets miss in the draft all the time. Yes, they do. But on the flip side of it, when have they ever developed a guy? There's a lot of players they have picked that are starting in the league. I mean, Brandon Shell is the Seahawks right tackle, and everybody I talked to in Seattle said he's been pretty solid. So you look at, Chad Hansen is catching passes from Deshaun Watson. I'm not saying those are great players, but why are those teams getting more out of them than the Jets? And why does this happen every time? So those are the top two for me: ability to lead, ability to develop, and they have to get it. They have to get a coach that gets those things, because if they don't, I hate saying this, but it will be the same old Jets that we are used to seeing.
God, I hate hearing that. All right, that's a beautiful.
It's the worst saying in football.
I don't know if we had to rank them, but when all those when the Jets suck, which obviously has happened a lot because now they have the most active long playoff drought. Thanks Buccaneers, thanks Browns for your contributions. Now the Jets are number one on this list. So every time people bring up the Jets and they're not a Jets fan, same old Jets. God, that I fucking hate that. I just. So to get that, there's the first swear jar of the show, but that just pisses me off. So that's always great. Well, Connor, man, I want to thank you for joining us here on the show. I know you're doing a bunch of interviews. It's a crazy week. Everyone can't wait to tune into Badlands. So thank you so much, buddy, and we'll be in touch.
No problem, Paul. Thanks for having me, man. It's always good to catch up with you.